Welcome back to Educator.com's English Grammar course. This lesson is on active versus passive voice. Let's get started. Alright, we're going to start with a brief lesson overview. We're going to ask what is the active voice, what is the passive voice, and then we're going to cover when to use active and when to use passive. Now, you've probably been told in class, never ever use the passive voice, it's terrible. But there are actually certain circumstances where you should use it. So we're going to talk about when it's appropriate. But to begin with, what's this voice thing? Well, in the active voice, a sentence written in the active voice, the subject of the sentence actively performs the action. This is the kind of sentence you see most often, active voice. So, William Shakespeare wrote Hamlet, my favorite play. The subject is William Shakespeare, and the predicate is wrote Hamlet, my favorite play. Shakespeare is the person who wrote Hamlet, so it's in the active voice. Similarly, your dog, subject, chased my cat into Fred's yard today. Your dog performed the action of chasing my cat. All right, well, if that's the active voice, what's the passive voice? Well, in the passive voice, the subject of the sentence receives the action, and the agent of the action is removed or displaced. So, Hamlet, my favorite play, was written by William Shakespeare. Well, now the subject is Hamlet, and the predicate is was written by William Shakespeare. So the subject actually receives the action. This is not as strong a construction as active voice. Similarly, my cat was chased into Fred's yard by your dog today. Well, if you're having an argument with somebody, you're probably going to put your dog right at the beginning. It's weaker to say, my cat was chased into Fred's yard by your dog. It's wordy, it's confusing, you get lost about who did what. It's in the passive voice. All right. Let's do a little practice before we go any further. See if you can look at these sentences and determine whether they're in the active or the passive voice. The judges have selected a winner. The winner will be announced tomorrow. A prize of $10,000 will be given to the winner. Take a good look. Pause the video if you need to. All right, the judges have selected a winner. That is active. The action is have selected, and the subject judges is who's done the selection. The second sentence, however, is passive. The winner will be announced tomorrow. The subject is winner, and the verb is will be announced. Well, the winner isn't going to do the announcing. The winner is going to receive the announcement, so it's in the passive voice. A prize of $10,000 will be given to the winner. Once again, the subject is prize. The verb is will be given. And since the prize is receiving the will be given, it's not doing the giving, the sentence is passive. All right, so when do you use the active voice and when do you use the passive? Because they have a clear agent of action, sentences in the active voice are more direct and engaging. They're also more concise. You'll want to use the active voice in most cases. It's kind of our go-to voice in English. So, the passive is, the home run was hit by Babe Ruth. Well, that sentence is all about the home run. The active version is, Babe Ruth hit the home run. Now the sentence is all about Babe Ruth. It's shorter, it's punchier, it's more concise, it's a stronger sentence. So, for almost everything, you want to use the active voice. But there are exceptions. There are times when you have to use the passive voice. Those times include when you want to minimize the significance of the agent. You know who did it, but you don't want to say because it's really not important. What's important is the action. So, the medication was administered to the patient, or the experiment was conducted as described. This is most commonly used in scientific and academic journal articles, where it's considered rude to say over and over again, I gave the patient the medication, I performed the experiment. It sounds like you're bragging. So, by custom and tradition, in English language journal articles, you use the passive voice a lot to minimize your own significance so that you come across as humble and professional. Outside of journal articles, though, in academic writing, passive voice does not tend to get used in this way. Okay? You can also use it when you want to emphasize the recipient of the action. Let's face it, sometimes the recipient of the action is more important than the performer of the action. Charlotte was fired today. Well, it's not really important to say the boss fired Charlotte. That would presumably have to be who did the firing. But this sentence is about Charlotte. If you're sharing the news with your friend, oh my gosh, Charlotte was fired. It's about Charlotte, so you use the passive voice. George Washington was inaugurated as the first president of the United States in 1789. Again, that sentence is about George Washington. You don't really want to hear about who did the inaugurating, the guy actually reading the words in the ceremony. You want to hear about the guy who became president. So, George Washington was inaugurated. You use the passive voice. You also use the passive voice when the agent of action is unknown or cannot be revealed. You don't know who did it, or you don't want to say for whatever reason. So, classic example. George was murdered last night. Well, let's say that we're really sure it wasn't a suicide or an accident or a natural death. Let's say George was shot a bunch of times. But we may not know who did it. We know it's murder. We don't know who did it. So George was murdered. All we know is that George was involved and murder was involved. We can't say Fred murdered George because we don't know. Who's Fred anyway? All right, another example. In my favorite mystery novel, Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None, the characters are killed off one by one. Now, if this is your favorite mystery novel, you've probably read it a bunch of times and you know who did it. But if you're telling someone else the story, finding out who did it at the end, that's the big twist. You're spoiling the story if you say who did it. So you use the passive voice. The characters are killed off. You mention there's death, you mention there's killing off, but you leave the surprise ending for the reader to enjoy. All right, let's do a little practice. See if you can make these passive sentences active. Eugene should be given another chance by the coach. Due to circumstances beyond our control, the brochures can't be delivered today. And the test will be taken by over 3,000 students statewide. Take a good look, pause the video if you need to, we're turning them into the active voice. And here we are. The coach should give Eugene another chance. Now the subject is coach and the verb is should give. So the subject of the sentence is performing the action. It's now in the active voice. Due to circumstances beyond our control, we, subject, can't deliver the brochures today. So now this makes a little bit of an assumption that the person speaking is part of the entity that would be delivering the brochures. But in this case, if it's your sentence and you're saying it, you probably know who's supposed to be making those deliveries. And over 3,000 students statewide will take the test. Now the subject is students and the verb is will take. The subject is performing the verb, so you have an active voice sentence. All right, let's make this a little more complicated. In these examples, we have the active and passive voices marked out. Your job is to determine which use is appropriate. So we've got both the active and the passive version of each sentence. Listen, see which one is stronger, see which one makes more sense and sounds better. The noise of the fireworks frightened Hannah. Hannah was frightened by the noise of the fireworks. See which one works better. Builders completed the bridge in 1902, or the bridge was completed in 1902. Take a good look. Pause the video if you need to think. All right, both of these sentences are actually better in the passive voice. Trick question. Hannah was frightened by the noise of the fireworks. That makes the sentence about Hannah and her reaction, as opposed to making it about noise. Generally speaking, humans prefer to hear things about humans rather than about non-human things like animals or inanimate objects or noises. So we make the sentence about Hannah and we put it in the passive voice. Builders completed the bridge in 1902. Well, we do have a subject there, builders, but it's kind of weak and generic. We don't have a specific, Bob completed the bridge in 1902. So we make the sentence about the bridge itself, which is probably what you were focusing on all along if you have information about the bridge and not the people who built it. So the bridge was completed in 1902. Passive voice, but a more appropriate sentence. Okay? Take a look at these. See if you can figure out which version works better. Investigators found wiretaps on the house telephones, or wiretaps on the house telephones were found by investigators. Someone stole my car last night, or my car was stolen last night. Take a good look. Pause the video if you need to. Which one works? All right, investigators found wiretaps on the house telephones. Your clue here was partly the length. The passive voice version is longer, it's less concise. So we use the more concise, investigators found wiretaps on the house telephones. We know exactly who did it, and the focus is on the investigators and what they found. Active voice, in most sentences, that's what you're going to use. But the second sentence, someone stole my car last night. This is a bit like builders completed the bridge or someone murdered Fred. We don't know who did it, okay? So we use the passive voice so that the focus is on my car. My car was stolen last night. If your friend's car is stolen and they call you to tell you about it, they're going to start with my car was stolen, not someone stole my car. Someone is weak. We don't know who someone is, so we focus on my car and we make it passive voice. So there are cases where you can use the passive voice, even some cases where you should use the passive voice, like in academic writing. But for most sentences, the active voice is what you want. You want the subject to perform the action with very few exceptions. And that's all for this lesson. Thank you for watching Educator.com.